So last video we talked about the most underrated effects, and in this video I want to talk to you about the best effects. And these are effects that if you know how to use all of them, you can do pretty much anything that you want to do in After Effects. And all of these effects, they can kind of intertwine and they build off of each other in really cool ways, which is what I'm going to try to show you how to do in this video. All right, so let's get into it. So the first one we're going to take a look at is Fractal Noise, my personal favorite. So we're going to make a new solid and we'll add Fractal Noise to it. So I'm going to search for Fractal Noise, and I'm using FX Console for this little search bar. It's a free plugin. I'll put a link to it in the description. So Fractal Noise right off the bat just looks like some boring clouds that you can kind of wave through. And you know, Fractal Noise by itself, you can just make like clouds. You could do something like change all of this type to like whatever, you know, you can make it like strings and change the contrast. Maybe you add like a tint to this and change the colors to blue and a lighter blue, and now you're gonna like make some water or something, right? So off the bat, like just playing with Fractal Noise, you can make stuff, right? But this is not, in my opinion, the true power of Fractal Noise. The true power of Fractal Noise is that it acts like a driver for other effects. You use this to power other effects, which is what I'm gonna show you now. So for example, let's say I delete this stuff and I'm gonna reset this Fractal Noise. What I could do is I could say, okay, let me change this noise type to something like block, and I will bring down the complexity a lot, all the way to like 1 here. Okay, and let me open up the evolution options here, and we'll animate the random seed by adding like a time expression, time times 6, something like this, okay? So now we have like a glitchy pattern, something like this. And this glitchy pattern, we can pair with something else, like a displacement map that will glitch another effect. So we'll use this to power a displacement map. So this is gonna lead me into the next effect, displacement map. So now in our displacement map comp, okay, I just made a different looking glitch, okay, a little kind of scarier one. And let's say I wanna use this Fractal Noise here that I made to glitch out this video of this group of nice friends, right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a new adjustment layer, and I'm gonna add on a displacement map, okay, like this. And I'll go ahead and I'll hide this displacement. We don't need to see it. You can even turn it off like this. And I'm gonna say with this displacement map, let's target our displacement, which was the Fractal Noise, okay? And we'll use the effects because the Fractal Noise was an effect, okay? So now with this, we can say, okay, well, let's animate this over time. So we'll start at 0, right? And then when these friends go in for a hug right here, we'll animate from 0 up to like a lot, something like this, okay? So now these friends, they start out normal and then they go in for a hug and then they start to get displaced using the values of this displacement, something like that. So now we could also take this same technique and do something a little less disturbing, okay? And maybe we'll make a kind of jittery text effect that's like this, okay? So what we did was using the same technique before, we just animated that Fractal Noise. So we have something like this that's kind of jittering around, okay? We'll hide that, and now we have text here that we want to jitter, make kind of like a stop motion jittery effect, and then we apply a displacement over top, right, like this, that is now making that jitter around according to that Fractal Noise below it. Get it? Good. All right, next up is transform. So you know how you have all of these transform properties here? Well, what if you wanted to kind of apply those on either an adjustment layer or on a layer property, but in a non-destructive way? And by non-destructive, I mean in a way that's not on this layer or doesn't apply these kind of keyframes here. Well, you could do that if you kind of add a new adjustment layer and then search for the effect transform. So now what you can do is you could move things around here or scale them up like this. And this is now happening with this effect that you could toggle on and off. So why is this a really good effect? Well, it's good because let's say, you have this animation that's happening here, but maybe you just want to try it out somewhere else, but you already have these keyframes that are happening. So, if you were to try to move this down, it's going to make a new keyframe. Well, if you add a transform effect to it, you could just try pushing it down over here and see what that looks like, okay? And give it a little scale up like this and see how that looks. And if you don't like it and you just want to kind of temporarily turn it off, you just turn off the effect that does it. And now another thing I like to do with transform too is I like to make fake cameras using it. So let's say you make an adjustment layer over everything. You could add a transform effect to this, like this, and you could say, well, let's wiggle around this rotation by alt-clicking on the stopwatch here, and we'll type in wiggle, open parentheses, and we'll add this expression, let's say 1 times a second, comma, it's gonna wiggle 5 pixels like this. So now we have this little wiggle that's happening here, and this doesn't look really that great because of the content that's happening here, but this can be really good for adding like fake camera movements in your scene without having to actually put in a 3D camera. I use this all the time, pretty much on every project. Echo. Echo is a crowd favorite, and it's super useful for adding like little trails to your animation to make them a little more interesting. So we have this ball bounce that's going to come in. What happens if we add an echo to it, right? So off the bat, echo is going to just add in 1 copy. You can see it's adding here, and it's adding a like a blending mode to it. So let's say we change the blending mode to either maximum, something like that. That will kind of blend these in. I actually don't know what these mean. I'm sorry about that. Should have practiced this. I think maximum usually is the one I go to because it doesn't give it a weird blending mode here. But and I'll change the echo time to be something lower, like 0.003, and that will give it a lot less time, and then we can just crank up the echo amounts to something like this, okay? So now we have like this really cool trail that's gonna happen. If you do a lot of echoes, really gets up there, it starts to become really intensive on your playback times. So just be aware of that, okay? And this can be really nice here. And you can just play around with this time. If you hold Control while you're scrolling, it's gonna make the digits smaller. All right, so you won't have such crazy times, but it's probably just gonna be easier to get in here and just type these values to be smaller, all right? You can also play with the starting intensity to make it like play with this opacity, or the decay to make the ending ones fade away, all right? And you might also be familiar that echo is what I use a lot to make like a really nice warp speed effect. You can check out my video on warp speed here, also in the link below. So I'll use this on a CC starburst effect, right? So it looks like this, but if you add an echo effect, then it's gonna kind of add this drag that happens on your stars, and it will add this nice warp speed effect. Will also kill your computer, makes it very slow, but the effect is really nice. So Colorama is so powerful, and it's also very hard to use. But basically, if we have something, I'll just use Fractal Noise here, right? A basic Fractal Noise, and we add Colorama to it, all right? Now, what Colorama is gonna do is it's basically going to add color according to a certain like parameter. So right now it's adding these colors, which you can change according to a palette, or if you want to type them in here. And right now it's adding them to the intensity, right? So you can see it's kind of adding green and yellows to where it's black, the intensity there. and it's adding like dark blues, cool colors to where it's white, all right? And you can phase this to be different, to like kind of reverse that, right? So you could change this to be happening from the alpha, which in that case, it's just gonna be solid because there's nothing transparent happening here. But these different options allow you to do some really unique things with Colorama. So for example, let's say I have a repeater shape like this, okay? So this is just a circle, an ellipse, I should say. An ellipse that has a repeater with 7 copies, okay? This is how I'm doing this. It has 7 copies. They are scaled up, all right? And the end ones have opacity at 0, so they're fading down. So now if I was to add a Colorama to this, Colorama, and change this phase to alpha, now the outer rings are going to have a different color based on that opacity. I have a whole video on Colorama and using repeaters to do interesting things. So if you want to learn more about this, then check out that video. Link in the description, all right? Slider controls. I didn't know if I could technically call this an effect, but it's under effects, so we're going with it. So slider controls are so powerful. Really, all of the controls are powerful. All of the expression controls are super powerful, but we're gonna go with slider controls because it's my most used. So here's a basic example of what you could do with a slider control. Let's say you have some text here, and let's add a slider control to it. You can actually see that slider control is my #1 hotkey. All right, let's add a slider control here. Now you could do something like, if you have a source text here and you want it to be linked to a slider for numbers, well, all you have to do then is pick whip this source text to a slider here, and now this is linked to this number, and it's going to be whatever you want here, right? And this is animatable because it has a stopwatch like this. Basic example. Let's take it up a notch, all right? So I have all of these leaves that are, they're wiggling on this stem, right? So they all have a basic wiggle expression, which is wiggle parentheses, frequency, comma, amplitude. So the amount of times per second it wiggles, and then the amount of pixels that it wiggles, all right? So what if I wanted to change all of these? It would get really annoying to go in and change each one of these individually, right? So what I could do is I could set up a controller layer. So I'll make a new null object like this. Sorry, I will do it by right-clicking and creating a null object. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a slider control. Let me duplicate it because we need one for each of these to link to. We'll call the first one frequency. We'll call the second one amplitude, right? And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this first little number here, just highlight the number, and we will pick whip this to the first slider, okay? And we'll grab the second number here and pick whip this to the second slider, all right? Now what I can do is I will just copy this expression by right-clicking on the rotation here, copy expression, and I will paste it on both of these. Boom, so now they all have the expression. So now if I go back to this and I type in whatever I wanted, let's say 1 times a second, it rotates 5, okay? So now they're all having this expression, and I can change them all with this. So let's say it wants to happen 20 times a second, it wiggles 48. Now it's gonna look like this. This is a pretty crazy plant. Whatever, maybe it's on like Mars or something. I don't know. Actually, there's no plants on Mars that we know of yet. Maybe one day, but it could be. So we could do whatever we want, and now all of these things are linked to this slider, and it's great. And you can see how this could be very useful in a like crazy project. All right, gradient ramp. It makes a gradient, and it can be really useful when you need a gradient. Repetile is really awesome when you need to repeat anything. So let's say I have a piece of footage and it's just like a little bit too small. So I'll add a repetile here, and we'll expand this footage out in every direction like this, right? And I'll change this tiling to unfold, right? And it looks pretty good. You can't really tell that stuff is repeated around the edges. Now this obviously isn't gonna work in every case. Sometimes, like you can kind of see up here that it's mirroring, but a lot of times you can get away with it. But it's not just good for like repeating footage like this. So let's say I have this kind of pattern tile, right? It's just this tile like this, doing this, nothing special about it. And if I wanted to repeat this pattern across this whole canvas, well, I'm not gonna just like duplicate it like this each time, okay? I'm not getting paid hourly for this job, okay? I gotta get this done quick. So what I'm gonna do is I'll add a repetile for this, all right? And I'll expand this in every direction here, up, down, left, right, all right? Tiling for this wouldn't matter because it's gonna be the same no matter what. But what I could do is if I wanted to like stagger these in a certain direction, what if I did something like I added a gradient ramp, like we learned about before, the great gradient ramp, okay? I'll add a gradient ramp here, boom, and maybe I'll change the ramp to be like more of a diagonal like this, all right? And we could tell our pattern to get affected by this gradient ramp. If we were to add a time displacement onto this layer, all right, that got affected by the gradient ramp with the effects like this and turn this on, okay? And so now over time, this pattern will be affected by that gradient ramp. Now, if you want to learn more about this technique way more in depth, I have a longer video about this technique, link in the description, all right? Check it out. Okay, next up is set matte, okay? So let's say I have this like swinging frame here and I wanted all of these trees to be in the frame, like they're a painting in this frame, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna draw a frame here that covers this, all right? So this will just be a shape layer, boom, 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 boom. This stroke does not need to be so aggressive, and we'll add a fill to this like that. All right, great. So now what I would do is I would parent this to the frame, right? This fill, we'll just call this the matte. Now, what you might want to do is you would think that you need to duplicate this a bunch of times, right? So this would be an alpha matte to this, and then you duplicate this, and you'd have an alpha matte here, right? And you'd have like a ton of alpha matte layers, right? And this would get really messy really fast. But that's not what we're gonna do actually. Okay, so we're gonna have one matte layer. And what we could do is we could just have an effect, oopsie, we could have an effect called set matte, okay? So we're gonna add set matte here, and we're gonna target our matte layer and make it effects and mask. All right, so now, where is this layer? This is this front tree here. So now if we copy this effect and paste it on all of these trees like this, they're all gonna be cut out by this frame. But you can see something weird is happening, and it's because this effect only works on rasterized layers. So that means that we need to click continuously rasterized for it to work properly, or they can be shape layers. But since these were imported from Illustrator, they need to be rasterized. So now, these are all going to be contained in this frame with just one set matte effect. But we're gonna take it a step farther. I'm gonna undo all of this, okay? Take the set matte off of here, because I promised you in the beginning of this video that these effects were gonna build off of each other. So what I'm gonna do instead is I'm going to make a new adjustment layer like this. This is our adjustment layer. We're gonna add the set matte effect to this layer, all right? And now with this, we're going to set matte with the matte, and boom, now our set matte effect is going to target the matte, and it's going to apply it to everything below it. And now you'll see that it doesn't matter if these layers are rasterized or not, because this one does not care because it's an adjustment layer. Let's take it a step even further, shall we? Let's add a transform effect to this layer. Now what we could do is we could animate all of these trees and like scale them up through here. We probably want to put this above here though. So we could like do like a zoom through the trees. We could rotate them, boom, and they're all getting affected through the set mat. Since the transform is happening before the set mat, it needs to happen above it, all right? So now we can do like whatever we want, scale them up, who cares? Doesn't matter. And we could toggle this off and they're back to normal. Beautiful. And finally, curves. Now, curves isn't really like the hottest tool, but it felt fitting for last because it's really something that I kind of always put on last when I'm working on a project. So let's say I have this little video here, right? You can pretty much always apply curves to like the end of a project or a piece of footage to make it just a little more contrasty. So what I'll do is I have this piece of footage and I'll kind of pull down and maybe add a little more value to the black values, and I'll pull up here and add a little more to the white values, something like this, all right? So here's with it on, here's with it off. It just feels like it just adds a little bit to it, all right? Basically, you just kind of add like a little bit of an S curve to stuff, and it just feels like it gives it a little bit more. But it's not just for footage, okay? So curves can also be used for pulling out extremes. So let's say I like add some fractal noise onto this, and we let's say we bump up the contrast here, and we'll add like a blur to this, like a fast box blur, okay? And we really blur this up, something like that. All right, now if I wanted to make these forms really solid again, like a camo pattern or something, well, I could add a curves to this. You could also do it at levels, let's be honest. But if I really pulled this stuff to their extremes here, like this would be a way that you could just get like the really only black and white like this, right? And you could start to get like a cow print or something like this, okay? And then if I wanted to, you know, just animate this. And I don't know what this is. I'm just showing you that you could do this if you wanted to. But this is a lot of ways to like start the process of getting more interesting looks, okay? You can blur stuff and then add a curves or levels and start to do interesting things with it, okay? All right, that is all I got for you in this video. I hope you liked it and found it helpful. Let me know what you think is the best effect. All right, did I miss anything that's on your list, or do you agree with mine? All right, let me know in the comments below. And as always, thank you for watching the video. I hope you liked it, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.